Hi guys.
Hello.
I talked to Mike and he was going to join, but I don't see him yet.
Let's wait a couple of minutes. Actually, Evan sent me a message in the Slack that he's not able to join. So let's see if Kevin is able to join or if anyone else from any other company is able to join.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey, Mike. We got a message from Evan from NVIDIA that he's not able to join, but let's maybe wait one more minute. Let's see if Kevin is able to join.
While we are joining, Mike, I would propose to discuss like this CDI approaches. So I kind of prepared like very early draft of my patch, and we have Christian patch. So I don't know, should again talk about it and decide which way to go, or like both ways, or like NRI, or like this the way that I went. So just a moment, I'll copy the link to PR.
But can you check, please, if I captured your open in the agenda properly?
Let me see where the agenda is. Okay.
It's in the chat.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense to me.
Okay.
Hey, Ed, just giving you a heads up. Putting yourself first on that list on the widths means you may not have access to the other changes that have already occurred. The labels won't be there, for example, when you process. Okay.
Yeah, but that's okay, because we are like, at least as far as I understood, we are just like adding stuff. But yeah, but again, it's like early draft, so don't expect like anything from it. It's just like a bit of code.
Yeah,
like,
no. Yeah, I was just trying to explain.
Yeah.
Why I'm sort of pushing you in this direction as well. right? I mean, it's like, what sequence do the CDI injections need to be, right?
Yeah.
Before the spec that you received from Kubelet or after, for example? Probably after.
Yeah, I would say
After.
it should be after. Yeah.
Right. So that's the problem. And that's also why we sort of need to do it this way, unless we're doing it with an NRI where the NRI plugins are all at a known location. And on the callbacks with NRI, we'd probably do it in 2 locations. If we, down the road, I can see some people wanting, the NRI injections to happen at the beginning, in the middle, and then maybe at the end. This kind of, who's on top hooks, I've seen them many times over the decades.
Yeah.
It
Well,
gets more and more
the
complicated.
only good thing about like this, I wouldn't call it implementation yet, but this draft is that like I checked it and it worked in both ways. So I was able to get the
Cool.
container spec updated and was able to see the updated resources in the container, like bin
Yep.
mounts, hooks, what else? Device. Sorry,
Yeah.
forgot about it. And also I was able to trigger it through the Kubernetes, and also like
Yeah.
like kubectl like exec to the container, and so like the same thing. So that's the thing. But the problems I see around is that I was actually expecting like to find the place in the container decor where like I would have already like ready spec, and I would update it, and that would work for all kinds of clients. But
Yeah.
like after conversation with with Mike, I kind of understood that that there could be like different approaches to it. So Mike, can you elaborate? So why do you think
Sure.
like
Yeah.
some of the things should be done on the client side and some on the server
Yeah.
side?
It's an architectural decision that was made early on in Containerd for the plugins, and particularly, in this case for the, the task service, that when you create a container, that the task service would be agnostic to the specification of that container. Okay. In other words, the client is in charge, not the core service that receives the spec from the client. Okay. We didn't want to get into a situation where each client needed to know what the core was going to do with their spec. Okay. And as you probably can surmise, we have a lot of clients, including Docker and, Kubelet. And Kubelet has, particular things that they expect the container runtime to manage. We have K3S, Rancher, CTR, NerdCTL, and each of them have their own unique command line and configurations, right? So, and when you look at the CRI stuff, you'll probably note that we have a store for the container, and there's an update API for the container. So the container specification that we start with in Kubelet for CRI needs to have that storage of the spec that we're using get recorded, so that when we do an update, certain types of fields in the container spec can be modified. For example, things like limits. Okay, how much memory that container has. You can only grow, you can't shrink, that sort of thing, right? We need to manage that, as well as additional volumes that may be needed to be unmounted or mounted based on requests from Kubelet. So those clients have an API, and the client that's in charge of managing the API service needs to know what's going on in some cases for things like modifying the specification. There's other things involved as well. For example, every container in CRI is a part of a pod, and those pods have their own additional specification changes. So here you're only modifying the defaults for a container, but there may be cases where those defaults are needed to be modified for a pod first. Okay. Does that help? Yes, there is a place we could do it in one place, but you'd be modifying all the clients that expect it to not be done there. Okay.
Mm,
And then you have the
Okay,
situations
but-
where, okay, we have n runtimes, right? And those n runtimes may in fact have their own expectation for, where they can modify the specification itself. It's not always run C, right?
Yeah, I understand that. But like if we go this way, then it would mean that we will need to modify all the clients. So that's what I was kind of
All the clients
hoping
that
to avoid.
create their own container, right? And that was the decision that was made early on, right? So if we make a change to that decision, we'll need to involve the authors, which includes Crosby and Derek and Stephen Day and a few others. Some of the people who might review these and approve them, like me and Akira Suda, weren't involved in that architectural decision.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, but how like this decision actually maps with the NRI? So we are anyway updating.
Exactly. Bingo. That brings up the answer to this question that has been brought up before was, well, let's create this NRI API or plugin API that can be used that will have the specific callbacks at creation time, before and after specs are generated, that sort of thing, before and after the containers are started, et cetera, right? Post start, that's type stuff. Those calls would be injected in, and integrated to call NRI, okay, specifically whenever that's happening on that client type. Now, we had only started adding NRI to the CRI API, but we would also need to do NRI in other client models that you wanted that those NRI plugins to work as well. For example, if you were going to use, nerdctl. CTR, by the way, isn't, it's a debug client. It's not really a first class UI or CLI, sorry, that we're trying to use. But yes, you could add it to CTR as well, just by adding the hooks to call out to NRI at the appropriate timings. Okay, for example, before and after it creates the container, and before and after it starts, and before and after the exit, and right before and after the container stops.
So related to this, I have a question, Mike.
Yeah.
And it's also related to basically our NRI exercise. So our first version was exactly like the current NRI implementation, that it's only bolted into the CRI plugin. But then we were discussing that it would be really nice if these NRI plugins that we have in mind, so not the original ones, could be applied or could apply basically actions to all the containers which are going through containerd and not only the CRI ones. And to this, and now so I have been taking a look at this, how to do it. And the only place I see in core containerd is the task where this could be currently done. So I don't see, so am I missing something? Because you were saying that, so the thing is that the documentation says that the containerd model is that you have a smart client, in a way a fat client. So, and that's really the way, so that's exactly what you described. So some of the things, and this is what now Ed is trying to do. So basically some of the things are done so that
that's right,
the client needs to do it because there is no suitable place in the core. So the client is knowledgeable of a lot of the internals of containerd. But so
I mean, you're saying that, but I'm not hearing you. Do you know what I mean when I say that the task service was architected to be agnostic of the specification?
I think I know, because that's why you have basically the specification is not an OCI spec, but it's a proto any type. So in principle, you could have basically an interface where the spec is not an OCI spec. In principle,
Yes.
you do not have it, but in principle, you could have it
Right.
architecturally. So I think that's what you mean. So nothing is being assumed about the OCI spec within
Nothing
the
is
task.
being assumed by the, right.
Yeah.
And what you're asking to do here is force tasks to be modified to do all of the injectors that we're already currently doing in all of the FAT clients. So you're saying you don't like the design.
I know, I'm not saying that. So
Okay.
what
Well,
I want,
it's the way it is. It's not. Yeah, but if you do these widths as you've shown here in your code, it's one line of code basically that you have to add where you want the width to be injected, right? With my changes, right? With CDI's changes, it's one call out. Yes, in all of the clients, and if any other client were to be created in the future, they would also have to understand that they're in charge of creating the specification, and they can use these built-in widths functions that we're already using. They can use the common code, for example. But again, the idea with NRI was we would just put the NRI injections in once, and then anybody could add a common plugin that would work with all of the clients through NRI. We just haven't done it in any of the other clients yet, except for the CRI. And even
but
that's
how,
not finished
but
yet.
where would you, so what I do not see is that what would be, so I understand that there is a really good spot for it for CRI, but for instance, for Docker, where would you put it within the, so if not the task, where would you put it within the container?
Docker has its own code for creating the spec. And there's a long, winded, old API for doing that. They have lots of settings, and they have lots of APIs that they integrate, they provide to other customers. Okay, so they decided to create their own spec.
But
so for us to modify their spec would be, and it works because we're agnostic inside of the core services for task, right? It works because they're going through our task API, which is integrates with the Shem API, which calls to the runtime that they requested, which could be run C or C run, or Kata containers or any other. And they know that they're responsible for creating the spec, and that's what they, that was the decision that was made when this architecture was built, 6 years ago.
So I guess what I was trying to ask is that would that be, so do you think that somewhere further down the line, it would be an acceptable approach that you would do the common NRI callouts from within the task structure, so that if then
it's not agnostic. Then it's not agnostic, because for this one CPI thing, we've decided that we want to change the design.
But
now you lost me.
I've got a list of 50 other. I've got a list of. I'm sorry, I said 50. It's probably more like 30 something other with extension points that we already do, but we're going to do this one different.
Sorry, I'm not talking about this CDI specific, this one particular example. I'm more talking about like that hooking in. So extending the NRI so that.
Well, on NRI, then for the NRI, then not CDI. Yeah. For NRI, the issue there would be, well, how would I do it before the task is called, before the the create container has been called, new container has been called? How would NRI hook that in that client before the new container has been called? If you do it inside of new container, you're at the end of the list of all of the other extension points. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, but is that a problem?
Is that well, it would be a problem if somebody needed to inject a label that was going to be used by an extension point down the list, for example. Another example is, what if you needed to inject something that's being tested in the client before it calls out to the NRI extension points? Some of the other changes might mean things like creating the user ID that's going to be used for this. If we call out to the, to the NRI only after we've changed the user ID that's going to be used, then you would not know what the original user ID was that came in from the Kubernetes spec. You would only see, the end result version of that. If you need to know both before and after, then you need two hooks. Two call outs, one at the beginning of the create and the API, and one at the end of the create. This is that whole, who's on first kind of problem. If the extension points have any relationship among each other, then you have to have a sequence. You could do that, one sequence for all NRI and take all of the code outside of CRI and make them all NRI functions. If you put it in, basically, if you put NRI inside of task, right? And we're going to replace all of the current with configuration setups into NRI plugins, then what you're saying would work. But we'd also have to modify all of the existing clients to take out all of their with functions and only support NRI. And then we could handle the sequence issues and that sort of thing. We could talk to Michael and ask if they want to, redesign how we're doing all of these extension points for the container spec, how we build it, that sort of thing, and take it away from the client and put it inside of the task. But I said you'd be forcing all the clients to use the same config, basically, right?
Well, not necessarily forcing, but so I mean, so the sequence basically means that it comes down to that who has the last say, not necessarily that who has. So you are right in that if you need to know the state before a change and after a change, then you have to hook into several places so that you see both states. But at least so.
And then there's the problem about storage in the updates, right? You would then also have to respond back to the caller, giving them the specification that was the result of calling it. In other words, when we call a new container, we pass it the spec. There's a get API, but the expectation is the get is never really needed to be called because it's never being updated because that code is agnostic, right? But there is a getter, but that's only on that's a client API. It's not expecting there to be updates. We have a store, for example, in CRI to store the the original spec that was generated after calling all the WIFs. We put that in the container store, and I believe we also stored the original spec that we received from Kubelet so we can calculate deltas for an update.
Yeah, I think at the CRI level, you are only storing the data that you received from the kubelet.
For the update calc, yeah. Then how will we do updates? We have to figure out how exactly to calculate updates if you're modifying things. You think we only start? I have to take a look at the API. I don't remember. I thought we were storing after all the changes too. Let me take a look. I mean, I get the argument, and I'm not saying there isn't. Yes, there is one place, but there's a reason we never did it there. Is what I'm trying to explain.
Okay, let me turn this question then upside down. So, do you think it's an acceptable first step for us and our NRI exercise to keep it bolted into CRI? So make it a CRI only feature, CRI plugin only feature. So basically a feature which applies only to CRI created containers as the first step. Because with
I think that's the primary case, but Yeah, I understand you have a need to make this work in Docker as well. I just, that's a different, yeah.
We don't have a need per se. It
Okay.
would be just nice to have it.
Oh, okay, I got
I
you.
mean,
We consider Docker as an important use case as well. So if it will be combination for some reason, like when one node, let's say like developer laptop, where he has both Docker and Kubernetes sharing the same instance of containerd, when it would be good to cover both of those clients.
Yeah, I agree it would. Recognizing that when you say you really mean same instance, because in many cases the containerd instance is going to be different between the one that Kubelit's running and the one that Docker is running. It could be the same, but even if it is the same, they are seen as two different namespaces in containerd, and we isolate.
Yeah, we're two different namespaces, but I'm talking from like system administrator point of view. Like I start only one containerd, and when both like clients are pointing to the same instance of containerd, like to the same socket of containerd.
And when the same socket, yeah, the same socket, meaning the same socket and config with local stat, things like that. Yeah, we've seen some of those, but we've also seen others where they're considering one containerd for Docker at release 1.4.11 or whatnot, and another for for the kubelet instance, which is running at 1.5 something or soon to be 1.6, for example, because Docker may not be at the same revision of containerd, or you might have containerd.io installed, and also have installed containerd in your cloud in a different fashion. If you're trying to get all cases, you might not get what you're expecting unless we backport the change to a service refresh, and that gets updated into the Docker containerd.io package. Okay. It's just saying that's also a complicated kind of situation. But if you have a common client API that's using these with calls, I suspect it's going to be basically one call out to that, one import, one call out to that, and render it to get Moby updated.
So, okay. Then I think that we have no other choice than currently. So
it's not no other choice. I'm not the guy to approve.
Yeah.
This particular type of architectural change in task. We would need a call with at least Crosby and Derek.
But Mike, the biggest question is: do we really need this architectural change? So if we assume like the same idea of what like the clients are like this kind of fat one, right? So CRI plugin becomes this fat plugin, and we can put NRI code where or NRI calls where. And for the rest, we can decide later. I mean,
yeah. I mean, you basically at the Intel level, you've got recently 3 new with calls that you want to call, right? One for CDI, one for R limits, and one for what was the third? Block IO. Right. And basically, those are just with extension points to the spec, right? Each one of which could have been done as an NRI plugin, but I understand the NRI is still floating around, so this is probably fine.
Yeah, but let's okay. You completely lost me. so many discussions or so many changes in parallel of say.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So basically, the concept is at the FAT API level in all of the containerd clients, where we put together the container specification. Okay, there's an NRI way to do that, which is just basically a call out to the NRI code, right? To call each of the plugins to do injections, right? That's one way to do it. And then you would just create a plugin for R limits, a plugin for CDI, and a plugin for, the block IO, right? Or you can go in and add a with call out, a with, extension kind of thing, which is the way we have it designed currently, to add extensions to the creation of the container spec, basically with R limits, with CDI, with block IO. Those are just call outs that we add to the options when the specification is created, and you put them in a sequence so that when the container is created, all of the call outs for the with options are called. Okay, that's currently how we add the extensions to the container spec. Okay.
So these options, what you are saying,
Yeah.
do we require changes on the clients?
Yes, each client creates a list of with funcs that add extensions to the container spec when it's created, when the new container call is made.
So do I understand correctly what Docker, for example, can say, I want to have this CDI with RDT, but without block IO, or vice versa?
That's right. The way Moby works is pretty much the same as how Cry works today, with respect to it creates a list of with funcs to use when the container is created. Moby is going to have the same kind of code where it creates the container spec before it passes it in to task. Okay. Docker is different. Docker creates its own, config JSON and its own root FS and passes that to containerd. We don't create the root FS or the config JSON for them. Okay. Sorry, this might be easier if we had a diagram.
I'm processing, or maybe like if it will be
Basically, what
if
Mike
it
is
would be
saying
some visual something.
Yeah. Basically, think of Docker creates the thing that Run C is going to boot on, and then containerd creates the shim, if you will, and some process, type stuff for running that new container in the isolation, all that kind of stuff. We do some parts of the container creation, but not all parts. When you want to run a container, you basically need an init proc that's mounted to a root FS using a config JSON. Those things are passed to Run C. The config JSON, the root FS, okay, to mount. All right. And the Run C creates the container, but it's as a child of the init proc that's running for what we call a shim, right? So that if containerd goes down, the shim is still waiting for the response code from the container and the logging and things like that. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
As far as I could see, like from the CTR code, the order is actually hard coded. So you cannot say that like call like this with function before that. And then like, I mean, on the client side, you have to code it. So you have to,
you'd have to add new
I mean, it's not flexible in a way that you cannot swap like those with function unless you modify the code and actually like
that's
them
right.
there.
You'd need if you wanted to be able to swap it, that would be a CTR option. You'd have to put the switch there.
Yeah. Okay.
See, that's sort of like, yeah. So making that done in some kind of other config without doing, command line options might be confusing for CTR users, where for all the other options they would set, if they're going to set something, it's done in a very physical way. And again, CTR is just a debug thing. It's not expected to replace Docker or Cry,
Okay.
right? Or kubectl.
So we have two ways anyway. And as a CDI project participants, we should decide which way to go. Like I'm still like kind of, as far as I understood, you are kind of learning to the like this NRI thing, or both, but not
Well,
just
there's a
like
refactored. There's two versions of NRI now. That sort of we need. Michael hasn't, reviewed the refactoring of NRI, so that for me that sort of puts NRI on hold until that's been reviewed and merged or not.
Yeah, but from other point of view, like this approach with function, that would only work on the client side. So I did it for CTR, but as you mentioned, it's not like kind of not many users actually use it, right? So and to do it for Docker, it's much
debug only. It's a debug only use case.
Yeah. Yes.
Test
So I'm
testing. So yeah.
still thinking what would be the good way to proceed. So that I was expecting that like while CRI work is ongoing, so it's like bigger project, we can just do it like in this simple way on the containerd level. But if it contradicts with the design, I just I'm a bit lost here.
Yeah. It would work, but Docker wouldn't know how. They would have to change their documentation. Let's put it that way. The Docker documentation would go from, go here and set the Docker config this way and call the Docker client this way, and you'll get CDI changes, to go into the containerd, config and do this. And, they would have to start explaining how to use containerd, because containerd is doing the CDI modifications. Because it's no longer agnostic to the, right? You get the idea. It's like, oh.
Yeah, I got the idea. And actually another point is the device specification. So you cannot just pass like device as like in this CDI form, the vendor / device name. So some clients, well, most of them probably would just would not allow like this kind of device. So we anyway have to modify their like verification code, like the like validation code for device spec. So
bingo. And you'll look, if you look inside of the CRI, you'll see how we do validation of certain options and configs. And if you need more validation for CDI, that that should be done in your with call.
Yep.
If you can do it in a generic way, if you need to do it specifically for the CRI in comparison to flags and options that are coming in on a CRI API, then you would do that validation before you add your with call out func, right?
Yeah, I understand. And it's also probably true for kubelet. I'm not sure that kubelet would allow to pass the like devices in this way, so it would probably not cannot go through kubelet validation. But I didn't try. So
I tried it.
Oh,
well, no, sorry, I didn't try it. But on the CRI plugin, it goes through.
On the CRI plugin.
Okay.
Well, at least I didn't. But you might, but I had this NRI modified thing, so maybe you are right. But I think that you need actually not more, but less validation. So add what you need is more liberal client, which is let things through basically and less verified.
Well, I
device string
have
and
no
not
problems
this-
modifying the clients, but that's again, so it's we have a lot of clients, so and some of them are hard to modify, like Docker. For
Yeah,
example.
yeah, I agree. But I think that's your problem, that you are afraid of that some of the clients will be too smart about the device name and will not let through
Yep.
such a request because they will see that, hey, we don't have such a device. It cannot,
Mhm.
this cannot work.
Mhm.
So a little bit too smart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
I
sort
kind
of
of
how they want to play, right? Yeah.
yeah. I understand. So we actually that's a good conversation. So we actually show
It's
like
complicated.
discuss that there are a lot of problems, but I'm not seeing the solution.
Well, our hope was NRI would become a solution that could be supported generically by all the container runtimes and right the runtime engines and the fat clients, that we could all sort of settle in on using one plugin model for adding these extension points. We were hoping for that as a way to get out of this. Anytime somebody wants to add a block IO kind of config change, they have to write a with and add it to each client. We're hoping that would happen.
So, Mike, when it means what the prototype what Christian is working on, the NRI hooks needs to be in task to intercept like every single client, right?
Yeah, no.
Okay, where?
Same problem, same problem, right? There's a before and an after the tasks is called. So in a before and after other extension points are called. So it sort of depends, right? In the create case, I believe what you need is to create NRI callouts for the context, right? Where, the before and the after for the creates are happening, right? The same thing with the starts and the stops. You need to have that sort of context, okay, be passed to the NRI code so that it can do the call outs for all the plugins that are installed. But you need to do it in each fat client. At least in Containerd, you would need to do it in each fat client where they're doing such things. The argument, I hear your argument, right? And it's not an invalid one, that you could do that in task. Okay. But we would have to have that agreement from the task, the architecture guys, in Containerd that said no way, because that's currently being handled in the fat clients already, right?
It's not really argument or us. It's more about like we're trying to understand where to get it. So we are looking for suggestions, and you and Mike Crosby are better people to actually tell or point to the right place.
Yeah, well, if you look at how Michael did NRI, you'll see he added it to fat client points inside of CRY. He didn't add it to task.
Okay. So.
And he knows this code better than pretty much anybody, how that whole core works, right? And that's why he wanted it done that way, I believe. But yeah, I can't speak for him. We'd need to get him in on a call to talk about it. He may be perfectly willing to modify a task to add, NRI to it.
Mike, can I ask you a favor?
Yes.
Can you organize a call with Crosby and any other Containerd maintainers who like the best people to discuss that, so we can discuss and get the opinion and then go forward with NRI.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing a Containerd, meetup, and this would be a great topic to handle. And that it would probably be a long meeting, but we could definitely schedule it in there. We wanted to do it before KubeCon and it just didn't happen, mostly because we're trying to get a release out. But I think now it's probably, when I say now, I'm going on vacation Thursday. Yeah, we're coming. We need to do it before the holidays, before everybody leaves, right?
Yes.
So anyways, I'll be back a week from next Tuesday.
But that means like we will have like few days before Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah. Now, well, we can just, I mean, the way he's putting this PR together and the way your guys have put the other PRs together, just doing with extension points, that those can work. I don't think they'll be merged as core service plugins, but certainly as with extension points,
Yeah, Mike, let's not mix all of
All right,
these
no,
things
let's not
together.
mix. Okay. All right.
So,
yeah.
so
I think we can merge it the way he's been adding, that way Ed's been adding CDI. I think that's going to be a mergeable kind of thing, and we would just have to handle later on if we when we go to NRI, we'd have to handle how we want to do. Do we want to do a CDI plugin later on? One way, so you don't have to do CDI 10 different ways. Once we have a CDI plugin that ships with Containerd, then we could pull this with code out, this with extension point for CDI.
That's actually a good idea. So like at least it could be like done faster than NRI.
It'll be done a lot faster than
much bigger project. Yeah.
Yeah, much bigger project to get NRI closed and then add it to there. Yeah, so just adding it this way is the way we've done it for all the other extension points, for the last 4 years. So it's a common model. We know how to work with this. If you need a switch to turn on and off to disable it, that's fine too. We'd have to see, I haven't code reviewed your CDI integration yet to see if it's clean. It probably is. Right?
It's most probably not.
Oh, okay.
But I would like you to look at it at least and comment. Like,
yeah, I mean, we've got it in init, for example, in Cry. If you need to check things once, that would be the place to do it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you could just do an if enabled kind of check later on, unless you want it to be dynamic. If you need it to be dynamic, that's fine too. You just a file check. You're checking for existence of a config or something. That's probably fine too. But only once per pod, I think. Maybe, I don't know. We'd have to look at it. If you need it to be per container, that's also fine. There's once per create, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
CDI is one per container because when the pod is created, there is no information needed.
Okay, and do you need it to be dynamic? Once per container dynamically, so if they modify the config, on a create, the next, for the next create, sorry, after modifying a config, that would, modify that container. Is that what you want? If it's not per pod, then you run the risk of some of the containers having CDI and others not, right, during a pod run and container create kind of thing. Something to think about. Now, we don't have to answer that question right now. I'm just mentioning some things about state, which is again one of those things that you wouldn't know if you were in the task, because task doesn't know what a pod is, right? We'd have to start passing in the pod IDs for the container and all that kind of stuff down into. You start to get the idea why we wanted to do it this way. When we call out to your with code, you have access to everything that's in the FAT client at that point, right? Anything you need. Okay. But we do like to make it fast. So if there's any way it can be done, statically with the check for the pod or statically on the instance of the Containerd runtime, then that's better from a performance perspective, but not better from a how do I add this to a running node kind of perspective. If you need it to be dynamic on the node, then in your use cases, then we'll just have to eat the performance issue when CDI is enabled.
Mike, CDI is designed in a way when the container is created, And if container uses the device, so requesting for particular device ID, only when you are parsing the specification and when adding something.
So you got a match. I got you.
So if a container is without devices, then it's just like two ifs, which will be false.
Okay.
So like I don't expect like too much of a performance hit in that scenario.
Okay. So you're gonna look. So CDI is gonna load and parse the config on each container create.
Only if there is a device, well, in this particular format.
Okay, so if okay, so that's your switch. I got you.
Yeah.
So your switch would be based on a device. Is it in a annotation or is the device in something? Just one of the default devices that are passing in the array of devices from kubelet. I'm not sure.
Basically, it goes that way, that you ask CDI that is this device something that you know about? If CDI says yes, then you inject the CDI device. Otherwise, you treat it as a normal device. So it's like in a way, a virtualization of the device namespace.
Okay.
It's rewriting rules that when you have a special string and CDI knows about it, then instead of that string and other device plus associated environment variables, hooks, what else?
Right. And my
can
question
get injected,
to you then,
basically.
Okay, Chris, my question to you then in that case is, where is the config, and is that config dynamic or expected to be dynamic for the matching devices?
I think it's partially dynamic. So if you are talking about a kubelet device plugin, then I understood so that configuration would be also dynamically generated by the device plugin, right, Sasha?
Yes. So the device names, which is known by CDI, is a dynamic thing. That's the whole purpose of why we are doing it.
Now, when you say dynamic, for the purpose of review, is it dynamic over the life cycle of the container? Is it dynamic over the life cycle of the pod? Or is it only unique to each new container?
It's dynamic from the point of view of CDI, that the configuration does not necessarily exist throughout the full boot lifetime of the node in a static form, but changes. So in the CDI, basically CDI devices are getting added and removed to the CDI configuration. In that sense, it is dynamic.
Okay,
Yes.
I got you.
But for the life cycle of the container, it can be considered static, I would say.
Yes. So on the creation time, where device matched from CDI schema, injected into container, and afterwards not change it.
Okay, so nobody in kubelet's going to do an update on the container, adding a device to it.
Good question.
so the simple answer, no. And the reason for that is,
or if they did, we would use the existing maps that they already had for that container.
Well, that's also possible, but in reality, we're adding device to already running container is a problematic operation on so many levels. So I don't think it. And actually, I don't see any real use case where for already running container, adding device will be something useful.
Exact.
But anyway, if such a use case even exists, I wouldn't worry about it right now. So it's like it's another case. Yeah.
Because
basically, I'm trying to decide: are we going to have to store the config matching for a particular container? So if I did an exec process, does that exec have to mount that device as well?
No, the exec will already be like executing the process inside already existing container. So all the device not already created, all the hooks are executed, all the environments are already injected. So this thing is fine.
So it should just be a child. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So the thing is, if we are talking about already existing container, it comes down to OCI update request, and update request doesn't know anything about devices. And
Okay,
implementing that
Just-
for
it's just
devices
memory
will be a
limits.
nightmare.
Okay, so you're not going to make your switch based on a current CPU or memory limit that they're upgrading. So you're not using that as a switch and you're matching for the CDI extension points for the container.
No, CDI is only about devices. So
Okay,
only on creation state of a container
All right.
to prepare device
Gotcha.
nodes.
All right, I'm mixing again. Gotcha.
Yes, yes.
I'm mixing other features with this. All right, good. All
Yes.
right, thanks, man. Keep me in line here. All right. Yeah, then this makes sense. Okay, so yeah, that'll help me when I review your code, Ed. That's cool.
Okay, so I will add you and Sasha and Christian at least to the reviewers list, and you can invite other people also. Just let's have some discussion there and let's see how they would react. So
Yeah, on the CRI, you'll probably get some feedback from Fue, Kirasuda, Derek, maybe. Okay. Hopefully we can get Michael involved. He's been doing some stuff lately in cryometrics, so he might be interested. He's been around.
Well, I mean, we need to go forward with all of those features like one by one, or well, in parallel. So if like with CDI, it's important to get it working. So if we can get it working only for CRI interface right now, okay, well, let's be it.
Okay. Well, I know on his PR, it looked like he was hitting CTR as well. And I think that's okay. And then we can point, and the thing that's cool about that is we can point the nerd CTL guys at it, and maybe get them interested in, in adding a call out for it. Kirasuda is, usually pretty up on that kind of stuff.
well, if this is accepted, I can just like submit PR like against their code if
maybe
that
two
is
PRs.
needed. So no problem.
That makes
with
sense.
that.
Yeah, split it into two. Yeah, split it into two. One, adding CTR to CRI, and create another make the work in progress one, the one for CTR, and then poke Kirasuda for container D/nerd CTL, to see if you put it there, and the person. Let me see, for Docker, we don't have a maintainer for Docker, I don't think. The Windows guys get involved, CPU guy gets involved, and oh shoot. Hold on, let me give you the name of the, or I'll just ping it in the PR so they'll see.
Yes, please. That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That'll work. We'll get those through actually pretty quickly. Okay. All right. Especially
So
if you
I kind of like, I'm not very optimistic about the reaction, but let's see.
No, you're adding one line of code and an import.
Yeah, that's like a very simple thing. Yes.
Yeah, and a couple of pieces of code for the WISP, but that'll go really quickly. Actually, we do this all the time in Cry, believe it or not.
Okay, great.
My only question then was, do I need a way to switch it on and off? And it sounds like you already have that. So we'll want to make some comments in there explaining that this is dynamic, right?
I think I don't have it. I mean, on the container D, like there should be some like new option probably. Like on CTR level, it's simple. So if you just like pass these devices, I introduced new option, but I can modify existing devices option. But on the container D, it should be also like some kind of configuration option or command line switch. I don't know. Like that's if you can suggest which way to go, I can do that.
Yeah. There's lots of options already there. If you're worried about the performance impacts, and some people won't want CDI, then you can have an opt-out Boolean if you really want to, as an option in Cry, in the Cry config. That's just in case, right?
Okay.
But yeah, no. If all you're doing is comparing, you're opening a file, you're parsing it to get a list of matches. If that's going to be pretty quick code, and there's no semaphore, there's no mutex on it or anything like that. You're just going to open it for reading, read it in, parse it. That, I guess that's not, we already do that sort of thing in other places. So you would only be another 5% slower for us in that area, for opening up one more file. Just one more. It's just one more file, Mike. Don't worry about it. But if your CDI is if it's doing some weird stuff, then we probably need to switch.
Well, currently it does. It actually collects all the configuration files and parses them. Like, I mean, CDI
from a directory, right?
But that can be changed on the CDI level, so we can cache it somehow. So just
that's why I was asking. If you're caching it, though, you're not dynamic, right? So
not yet, but that was actually another topic which we wanted to bring, but we don't have any people from NVIDIA, so I will probably wait for the next meeting.
I mean, typically when you're doing a dynamic file update that users might hit, you can put a watch on the file, on the tree, right? That what would be an easier way, and then just cache it until the watch is hit, and just have a go thread there that's waiting on the watch. That might be a way to get around that. Another would be just once every couple of seconds or something, but.
Well,
create a context timeout to pop the cache. But then you need a lock, right? So
yeah.
Well, watch is one of the options, but we had our idea in mind. But anyway,
okay, all right, we got an idea that works for me. And we just need a comment then, around that with call out to explain the context of what's going on there. Just explain it a little bit so people know when you're doing the code. When they're reading it, they know what, okay, this is a little more complex than usual, right? Because it's going to external configs, and we'll need to modify our config documentation to include the CDI config locations. Okay, if you're just going to use a default that's offset from our existing configs, then we probably don't need anything extra. But yeah, I mean, there is going to be some documentation to explain people, to admins where they need to go to do this, right?
Yeah, it's better to have it as configurable parameter.
Yeah. So I'll point Ed to some docs we have around host config.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah. On the pull request. All right. It's just docs, no big deal. All right.
Right, gentlemen, we are running out of time, so probably we should close the meeting for today. Thanks, Mike, a lot for your help.
Great discussion.
Sorry, I can't answer. I can't just say yes on the do it in tab.
Well, Mike, but you can help us with organizing chat with other maintainers, because well,
yeah,
you know better the secret places where you chat.
I might have to remind them why they made the decision originally. They might not remember. It's just been 4 or 5 years ago.
That actually makes sense, but I mean, like, give me the already prepared spec and that's it. So that's my decision. So and that's kind of, it's not your problem. It's not my problem anymore. You just like delegate it to the client level. So
realize that some of these clients are even remote, right? They're not even local. They're gRPC service clients that are calling these APIs. So there is an expectation that the APIs aren't going to muck with their, the parameters. It's like, wait, you're going to do what? How am I going to, how do I need an event subscription model to be told when my parameters are modified? It's weird. All right, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Sorry.
Cheers. No problem. So let's continue in the Slack, and we will meet here in 2 weeks again.
Okay. Do we need to talk real quick, Alex, about the other changes, the block IO and
We can do, but probably let's close
Another
this
call.
one, and when let's have a just like ad hoc between Antti. Well, Marcus
Yeah.
already left.
Okay.
So you do you have time today?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, let me ping Marcus, and if we can just like ad hoc, probably via
Okay.
Slack. Oh, I have
Sounds good.
my-
Yeah, I didn't realize we were over the clock here.
All right,
I think-
let's close this
think-
one, and I will ping you in the Slack in a moment.
All right, man. Cheers.
Mhm.
Bye.